Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Michele Di Paola. I will be the host for today, which is the second panel discussion in the Digital Transformers series. And this one is about participation and inclusion in the age of digital transformation. Today, and together with me in the backstage, we have Laimonas Ragauskas, and also a lot of friendly faces in the boxes, which are our speakers, but also the people making this digital transformers adventure possible. So Maya Drobner, the project coordinator, and Henrique Gonçalves and Kadri Maripu, respectively from Salto Inclusion and Diversity and from Salto Participation and Information. And I want to start exactly leaving the floor to Henrique and Kadri for a short introduction to the project and to today's panel. Please, Kadri and Enrique, the floor is yours.
Welcome to the panel on inclusion and participation in the age of digital transformation. My name is Kadri Maribu, and I work for Salto Participation and Information Research Center. And my focus areas are digital transformation and participation. So this is the second panel in the series of inclusive and participatory digital transformation, which comprises together of 6 panel sessions. And it's also a part of a transnational cooperation project that is funded by 9 national agencies and 3 Saltos. And today we explore the main 2 topics, participation and information. And we will do it together with our 4 panelists. Further on, we will have panels upcoming every month until March, which will explore different topics in digital transformation framework in EU youth field. So if we have worked quite a lot with digital transformation as well as participation, if you would like to learn more, then please head to participationpool.eu. And for now, I wish you a wonderful experience and give word to Enrique.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Enrique. I'm from Salto Inclusion and Diversity, and I'm really excited about this panel. Been working with this topic of digitalization and namely, especially digital inclusion since the beginning of the pandemic, when our resource center was trying to understand how the pandemic and the fact that mobility activities were being affected by the COVID situation, how was that affecting young people with fewer opportunities and organizations that work with this target group. So we done some research, we did some surveys to national agencies, beneficiaries, organizations, and then we realized that after this research that, there's a long way to go, that we are still in the early stages of understanding how the pandemic and this digital transformation that was accelerated by the pandemic, how is it affecting young people with fewer opportunities. So that was the conclusion of a study that we started a few years ago with the pandemic, and now a couple of years later, there's been already quite some practices and knowledge shared, but as I said, we still feel it's still a long way to go. So it's also exciting to hear now from the panelists coming from different angles to see what you have to say about this topic in your own fields, so we can learn more from you and see what could be the next steps. But I'm really, of course, excited about this, and so thank you all for being there.
Thank you, Enrique and Kadri. And you mentioned already our panelists, our speakers. So I want to briefly introduce all of them. First is Dr. Adina Marina Serban, with a background in political sciences and extended expertise in youth work, youth methodologies and practices, and youth participation methodologies and digital inclusion policies, active in a number of organizations, and also member of the Romanian National Agency Pool of Trainers, Salto trainer herself, a Youth Wiki correspondent, and also president of the Center for Sustainable Community Development, a member of the Pool of European Youth Researchers, and the national correspondent for the European Knowledge Center on Youth Policy. And we also have the pleasure to have with us Jasmin Ruokolainen, which is a communication officer in communication and accessibility at the Peace Education Institute in Finland. Her organization is a politically non-aligned peace organization for educators who want to create safer, more inclusive and equal spaces guided by themes of peace education, anti-racism, equality and global citizenship. Also, Jasmin has an extended expertise in web accessibility and anti-ableism. Also, Jasmin is an educator in creating safer and more accessible spaces online in communication and at events. Another speaker for today is Thomas Schallhardt, political educator based in Berlin with 10 years of experience and focus on anti-discrimination, global justice, anti-militarism, and also involved in a lot of interesting projects like Expose, the Queer Film Festival, the Critical Queer Solidarity, the Bildung für Utopischen Wandel, which is in my broken German should sound something like Foundation for the Utopian Change, but then we will ask for a better translation, and the Service Civil International, where he was active with the training called Flow, and also a digital inclusion activist for Wikipedia, and especially for the project Wikipedia for Peace in cooperation with the Wikimedia Foundation. And Panu Rasanen is a planning officer at Verke, the Center for Expertise on Digital Youth Work in Finland, community educator, photographer, designer, and musicians, and with over 10 years of experience on digital youth work in different NGOs and municipalities, with a focus on young people not heard or seen in youth work by the usual youth work methods, on rap music and music videos with immigrants as an emotional education mean, and also youth hearing through Minecraft and social rehabilitation through gaming. When we speak about inclusion or participation in digital spaces, so what we are talking about, in your opinion? That would be my question. And there are possible connections between these two concepts, these two spheres of digital inclusion and digital participation. Jasmin.
Happy to see you all here today and welcome. I approach these things in this panel from the point of view of accessibility, which is defined as the value to be reached or to be entered. In Finnish, actually, we use two different words for accessibility. We use the venue full of obstacles view and getting rid of the actual physical obstacles, and then we use accessibility as a framework for inclusivity. And I would say that how digital spaces can be more inclusive is that they are also made accessible, and accessible also in technical sense, for example with subtitles and clear information, alternative text captions in photos in Facebook and Instagram posts, but also taking into account the different backgrounds and ways people act in online environments. In the same way, when we view a venue, when an event starts that doesn't have a ramp, doesn't have an elevator, doesn't have a different kind of signs for people who are blind, for example. So we need to learn how to ask similar kind of questions in online environments, because they are venues where we are participating in activities. So yeah, accessibility is a very baseline part of inclusivity, and if it isn't taken into account, it can lead to exclusion of people who, for example, need simplified language, shortened instructions, subtitles, and enough information beforehand before they can enter a physical venue at a live event. But yeah, I've also followed the discussion for the past like 3 years, how discussion about ableism and anti-ableism has increased during the pandemic, when everything pretty much went online in many places in like a matter of few days or a few weeks. And I could define anti-ableism now. Anti-ableism combats ableism, which is where people are like interpersonally or structurally, institutionally discriminated against based on their disability, or like, for example, language abilities, many kind of things. And accessibility is really important part in fighting ableism, which, for example, disabled people face a lot. Because it's like a similar kind of a tool in the framework of inclusivity as anti-racist and taking into account the socioeconomical background, for example. I will just summarize what accessibility means in practice and how to think of it as more than subtitles. So it's like more than accommodations, because it takes into account people as participants. Accessibility aims to create and improve the possibility to perceive, understand, interact, and contribute. So this means that people, if we want to create events for all and everyone, we need to broaden the understanding of what includes everyone and who we don't see at the events, and how many questions they've answered no to in their minds and haven't been able to say yes to an event invitation. Was it online or a live event? Because that's where you start to learn what kind of things you need to inform about, and what you need to also ask from those people that you want to see in your events. Accessibility kind of like addresses the invisible, and inclusivity aims to take those people in who are invisible at the moment for different reasons.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. We had a definition of anti-ableism, and we set these two different elements of accessibility and inclusion. We also need to define a bit if there is any connection towards participation. But let's go on, meanwhile, with this first round of voices and opinions about what we're talking about when we talk about digital inclusion and participation. After Yasmin, I would give the floor to Panu.
Yeah, I have been working for youngsters with less possibilities for past 13 years now, and for me the participation has always started to build up a community where the youngsters want to be part of and want to attend and want to contribute, and for different focus groups the community has been started from different points of view. Like as you mentioned, I worked with the immigrants doing rap music back in the day as an emotional education, and in Jyväskylä we did this youth summer camp focusing on using Minecraft as tool of youth hearing. So idea is to use the tools that the youngsters want to use and feel safe to use as ways to get them involved and tell their story. And this is a video from one of our summer camps where the youngsters actually decided what should one park in the city of Jyväskylä should look like. And this video is was shown to our city legislators as the youth voice, like what they would like to see in city of Jyväskylä. The point is to have as many as possible ways to get youngsters to interact and get involved in their own ways and in their own spaces. And this was quite a success, and we had lots of youngsters with neuropsychological disorders and some youngsters that weren't ever been involved with youth work before. So we have to have many different tools and platforms and to reach out these youngsters that we haven't heard before. So silent majorities are somewhere there, and we just need to figure out what is the common ground for them to be part of.
Okay, thank you very much, Manu. So inclusion and participation through digital means, and I guess you will tell us more about this Minecraft experience later on. But now let's go on with our guests to try to define the general concept and general idea of participation and inclusion in digital spaces. So I would now give the floor to Thomas.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invite. I'm going to tell you a bit about my experience of doing or trying digital inclusion and digital participation in non-formal education, and basically creating online spaces for political education, for talking about how the world is at the moment and how we can relate to it as youth workers, as young people. And yeah, like when I was working as a trainer in non-formal education before the pandemic, and I was just a new freelance trainer basically, and the pandemic hit, and I was kind of overwhelmed by the nothingness that was in front of me, like no projects, no travels, no youth projects anymore. And me and some friends, we gathered very quickly to think, okay, how can we do what we usually do also online, and how could we translate it into digital spaces? And basically, we tried out lots of stuff and taught each other things that we could think of. So we usually used Zoom, used Padlet, also other tools like what Pano just said, like using tools that young people already use. Like now I use Be Real or TikTok in my work. And we use these tools, like especially Zoom and Padlet, to create online spaces where people could interact with on a personal level, and then also work on some learning together. So we translated methods like World Cafe or Take a Step Forward, or I don't know, all of these classic non-formal education methods, silent exhibition, the Power Flower. We translated them into online versions, basically. And yeah, for me, non-formal education is the way to go also in digital spaces, because it's a possibility for people to learn more, I think, and learn better, and to reflect about their own experience related to a topic rather than just consuming knowledge. I think that's not how learning works. Learning always works with relating things to things you already know or that you already experienced. And so also in this online space, we realized that the projects that we did we had a really good learning effect, actually. Like people really enjoyed all of these games, basically. And we had a great time, and also kind of learned for ourselves what it means to create a guided virtual space. Like it influenced us a lot. And for me, this relates to a bigger question of like what digital spaces mean. Basically, I think digital spaces mirror often like power structures that we have in society already. So what is accessible for whom, who can go where, who can attend which content? Jasmine already talked about it. So for example, global injustices, like the global south is less represented on the internet than the global north. There's a gender gap. There's all kinds of gaps that we need to address also in what kind of projects do we do, what kind of content do we think is relevant. Yeah, and in this project that I will talk a bit more about here in this session flow, there was a online training that we did in 2021 as Service and Civil International, and we basically, it was a training of trainers, and we saw this training a bit as an intervention into what online spaces should be like, but also as an intervention into what non-formal education should be like. Like me and my colleague, my friend Sima, we participated a lot in international youth projects, and we thought that a lot of times they were not as inclusive as we wished. So we basically tried to come up with the most inclusive approach that we could think of.
We will hear more from you about this Flow project later on, but now it's still time to give the floor to Adina for this first round about the general definition, or anyway idea of what digital inclusion and participation are, and how they and why they should matter in youth work and in digital youth work as well. Adina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michele. And yeah, well, Thomas started with the questions. You know, as a researcher, I was supposed to come with the questions, no? More than with the answers. Well, thinking of how I started with looking at digitalization, well, that was before the pandemic, and basically we're trying to understand what's the link between it and social inclusion. And for that, we had the study, the EU Council of Europe Youth Partnership. So at that time, somehow we were doing something, trying to understand what's happening there. And then the pandemic came, and the study was ready just at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything somehow started to move online. And that was, you know, at the very early stages of our discussions about the importance of digital youth work. While the last year, also with the partnership, I co-authored a study that looked at the challenges that digital space imposes somehow. So somehow in 2 years, we got from, let's say, one angle to another, thinking about like from the opportunities that the digital space is offering to challenges that it imposes with. And in research as well, we don't know that much about what's happening with young people's participation in the digital sphere. What we know, and we know that because the practitioners also told us, is that it's not inclusive. But let's be serious, also the in-person activities that we are doing are not fully inclusive. So we probably don't have the pretension that we finally found somehow a new working approach that would be fully inclusive. And yeah, definitely the role of the researchers would be to work more with practitioners, and also to get these messages to work with policymakers, and to understand a bit how we can reinforce inclusion in digital spaces, even calling them spaces. Because whenever you say space, your thought would automatically go to physical spaces. So we do speak of digital space now, which is also different in terms of concepts and methodologies. So it's a long way to go for the research to understand what's happening there. There are still groups of young people, because we just don't speak of young people in general, because is not a homogeneous group that we refer to. I have a particular interest for young people with fewer opportunities, also for young people living in the rural areas. And basically, there's a lot that we didn't know before about these groups. And now with the pandemic and with all the consequences that it had, thinking about their participation in digital spaces, it's also with a question mark. So if we do speak of digital participation of those whom we call usual suspects, so young people whom we already see in youth centers, in youth activities, international seminars, of course, the digital space, it's fully participatory and they're there. But if we do speak of young people who are anyway facing obstacles to participation, probably digital space would come with even more obstacles. Of course, that you would say that, yeah, but it also came with opportunities. but yeah, we need better and more research to understand somehow if those opportunities were for a larger group, or it's basically only just a few people, and the ones who were left outside the participation sphere are still outside the participation sphere, no matter if we refer to the physical space or to the digital space. So it's with a lot of questions, and also somehow I'm looking at what's happening in and with youth work at the moment, and it seems that we really want to go back to the in-person activities. So there's also the question of what stays there in the digital world, and I really hope that we will not lose our interest to explore all these questions regarding youth participation in digital spaces. So I really hope that we would get to more answers than the questions that we have at the moment.
Mhm. Thank you, Adina. Also, I guess this is one of the reasons why this project is ongoing, to try to still try to work and focus on these questions and find some answer or solutions. Most of which are now coming, as you all mentioned, from practice and practitioners. So this now second round of questions will be exactly about these. Let's share about practice and what did you either create in your practices or found researching practices. So I would get back to Pano and to the Minecraft video. So I would ask you to explain a bit more and a bit more specifically what did you do. We understood that you used Minecraft, the video game, which is probably the most famous and most played video game in the world. And what you did was quite a sensation in Finland. You got to press and I guess television as well for this experiment, which was mixing up youth civic participation and digital spaces and video games. So please tell us a bit more, and also tell us what surprised you in what you did achieve. Was something that you were expecting, or was a surprise for you as well? What did you learn also as youth workers doing that kind of activity?
Well, the idea in this project was to search new ways of using video games to youth participation. In Finland, we have a lot of digital gaming in youth work. We have youth centers full of computers, and we have online youth work done 20 years or so. We have different game dev groups or hobby groups, and lots of streaming done by youth workers. And for me, this wasn't enough because there wasn't actually any youth work inside. It was more like we made the gaming possible, and there wasn't like some youth work background. So I wanted to have participation done through gaming, and we were thinking what kind of participation we could do, and I had this weird idea of combining city planning and Minecraft. And what I did was that I bought 3 square kilometers of Jyväskylä city map as Minecraft map. So we had all the streets and all the buildings done into Minecraft map, and we could continue from there. I had a contact inside the city planning committee, and they came to our summer camp and told about city planning projects that are ongoing, and they shared the idea like what kind of activities there should be, and what was the focus group of these new areas that should be planned. And one of the places was this park just behind the Jyväskylä City Hall, and it's a space that actually at the moment doesn't have anything, just few park benches, and that's it. So they wanted to hear what the youngsters would build there. What's the thing inside in the youth mind? How should it look like? So we built that on Minecraft. It's a bit blocky, but you get the idea what they wanted. So there's a cafeteria, there's a sitting place that you can spend time. There's a park for smaller children, and it's for everyone, as you can see from the rainbow flags and scenery. So what we did next was that this video was shown to our city zoning committee, and after that they had some kind of idea what would be, the idea of what would youngsters want to have. And I don't think most of this doesn't happen, but it's a way to have their voices heard in a new way. And all of these youngsters were such youngsters that weren't participating in any youth activities before. So this was first time they attended to youth center, and this was the first time they were part of some kind of youth hearing. So it was a huge success in the sense of youth work and participation. And the best part was that we had youngsters with neuropsychological disorders. We had girls, half of the attendees were girls, and so we had focus group that I wouldn't even dreamt to have there, and it was just amazing how they get together and just started building, and they made these fantastic things, and it really made an impact. And this was really interesting. This is the only time that the highest chief of youth work contacted me in Jyväskylä, like, okay, I heard about this Minecraft video, can you tell me more? So it went in our organization to the top level, but it was also in local newspaper. Unfortunately, it wasn't in TV, but local newspaper and radio picked it up.
Thank you very much, Panu, also for the details. I will move on now and ask for more insight and more experience. This time, maybe findings from experience, so involving Adina. Adina, you already mentioned the research that you were part of, just in the moment that everything changed from being like a kind of a pioneer adventure to become the only way to do youth work with the pandemics and the lockdowns. But anyway, I'm now curious to hear more from you about what were the findings in your research, and anyway other facts and findings in the field which can give us more insight about what we should focus on to improve inclusion in digital transformation as a youth field.
Well, basically, if we at least one of the settings would be fully inclusive, then we'll probably all move there and our mission would be gone, because there's a lot of us from different angles trying to make our work more inclusive and trying to do a better outreach when it comes to working with and for young people. And I think that Panu have been sharing a wonderful example of how youth work, it's really reaching its main function and objectives and working with young people who are not active on the scene before, being somehow invested with trust to use a tool that they would anyway use it, but with an educational purpose and with a participation aim. And I think that it's something that research should also look at and understand what tools and instruments were really effective in these years when we've been doing a lot of work online, and to see what worked and how did it work. Also, I've just seen now the health and the physical and mental. Well, I think that it's just now when we also started thinking of other, like when we do also online and also offline activities, and except for the digital youth work, smart youth work methodologies that were developed, and they're good that we have new concepts and new working methodology, because also in research we do see youth work as an evolving field. So basically it's not static. Youth needs and interests and challenges they face are changing. So of course that practice should respond with new methods and instruments to respond to the new context, and it's good that it's changing. We recently started speaking of mental health and of the effects of the pandemic on mental health. And it's the Youth Wiki correspondent. So basically we are national correspondents in different member states and some non-member states, reporting to the European Commission about the practices that were there during the pandemic in terms of supporting young people who have to have access to mental health services and to understand what happened with them throughout the pandemic. So it's a new report that the Commission published on the 10th of October. And I was mentioning, also two projects I was involved with, and I think that we also have the links for that, on understanding what's happening with young people living in the rural areas, and to understand that life of a researcher is not easy. We struggled a bit to understand if we should call our target group rural youth or young people living in rural areas. So we decided for the second one, because when you say rural youth, it somehow, mentally brings already a stereotypical image on the group that we were referring to. And also the other study that I was mentioning with limits to participation and also limitations that the digital space is imposing. Well, I think that we all know somehow that when the pandemic started, we just not really having time to prepare ourselves. We just jumped to using digital tools. And I don't know how many of us really had this digital literacy that was required. And now I'm thinking also about the youth leaders who are supposed to lead youth groups, and to start a discussion with them that, look, guys, you should be also aware, like, not to tick next when you're using a new tool, and to understand that, its data is being used somehow. So yeah, we just starting using it. So understanding better what's the level of digital literacy of youth workers and young people, it's a project that researchers should really work on, and policymakers should be then aware of what's happening there in the field. It's a lot of projects that started. I was just mentioning like very big topics, but we still don't know, and I've just seen the comment now, we still don't know anything about young people who were not active there. Digital nomads living in the rural areas, that's a separate category, but you also have NEETs living in the rural areas, and we don't know anything about them. So basically, we don't know things about the ones who are not visible. And of course, then you'd say, okay, and how to find out if they are not visible, how to find out things about them? Well, this is where somehow the function of this cross-sector dialogue should be there, because local municipalities should know more about them, educational institutions should know more about them, social services providers should know more about them. So maybe it's the role of the researchers to ask them more, and also to cooperate more with youth workers who know more about the youth universe. So it's probably the high time that we should really understand better and more how do we work in each of our angles of this youth triangle. And it's not sufficient to do a great work only in your corner. You just have to interact with the others, because young people do expect those projects and initiatives that would respond to their needs and interests. And again, I'm going to Panu's example. Well, it's possible. Like, we have Minecraft there and it's working. So why not offering them other opportunities to do that?
Thank you, Adina. So now I would listen to another experience, and I will give the floor to Thomas. Thomas, you already mentioned your experience with this Flow project, which was kind of a unique experience in how the need of putting everything online for the pandemic kind of pushed you to digitally transform your offering, which in this case, if I'm not wrong, was a training for youth workers and trainers. But I understood that some really interesting outcomes came out of that. So of course, this is what we are super interested into learning more about, how this transformation happened and how you made it to make it anyway inclusive and participatory, even if it had to be moved online like all of a sudden. And out of there, of course, any ideas and insight that you can share about what is making these kind of activities that you do able to at least respect, if not fully achieve, inclusion and diversity in digital spaces as well. So please, the floor is yours, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this project Flow, as I said before, I think we did it last year. And basically we went about different things. Like first we thought, okay, who has access to an online training like this via Zoom? Like it's video calls need kind of good, stable internet. So we offered participants that we would cover through our budget, like internet costs of participants to get faster internet access, which a few of them actually used. And then they had good, stable internet, which otherwise they couldn't have accessed the training because they were living in a place where there was no good internet connection, or they didn't have the money to have good internet connection. We also we had a few things that we just did from the get-go. Like we always put our pronouns in our Zoom names and just stress the importance of this in any space. Like if it's meant to be inclusive for queer people, we need to put the pronouns, we need to ask for pronouns, because you cannot assume somebody's pronouns by looking at them. And then we also thought, okay, for example, the content, like what could we talk about so that people themselves start talking about discrimination, start talking about inclusion, start talking about participation. And we discussed that just by creating a space, whatever that is, that doesn't mean that that even if people can access the space, it doesn't mean that everybody can participate in the space. I think like just because somebody is included doesn't mean they are included in how the space is set up. So we decided to always have this meta level in every part of the project. So every part of how we organize this online training, we had a meta level of like, okay, how is this accessible to whom? Like between us as trainers, but also with the participants, like what barriers are there here? What could you do to tackle this? What could you do to tackle that? And also, like, for example, when we gave examples, like there was a presentation where we're talking about love, like which couples do you show? Do you show only a man and a woman couple? Do you show different genders, different looks, different ages? Like we kind of try to have an intersectional lens at everything that we did. And that also led to us in this training talk a lot about discrimination, talk a lot about how we can create spaces for young people with fewer opportunities in our projects, just by basically living through an online space. We were open to criticism, of course, always, and like we're very happy to adapt. Like, so basically the space was very flexible and it was co-created between participants and trainers. And especially when we also had situations of discrimination popping up in the group, and then we had mechanisms in place to tackle them. The most important thing that I do online and offline is a group agreement with a group. So basically, like this discussion that was also in the comments, like, is it possible to create an inclusive space? I don't think it's completely possible to create a space that is safe for everybody. There will always be conflict, there will always be discrimination in a pluralistic society. So I think what we can do is to just try to get there, like, try to create a safer space. And we did this through this group agreement. So basically, we just asked everybody, what do you need in order to feel safe and comfortable for this online training? And people gave suggestions of what they would like the space to be like. They basically created a set of rules or agreements between them, and also with us as the organizers, the facilitators. So there was stuff about like, how do we communicate with each other? How do we deal with different language levels? How do we deal with poor internet connection? How can we still involve somebody if maybe your internet connection is not good sometimes? How do we use the functions of Zoom or Padlet in order to make everything accessible to everybody here? Speech time, who talks how much, giving trigger warnings for possibly heavy topics, taking care of each other, taking care of each other's well-being as well during the training. Stuff like this we did. And then we had regular moments of reflecting about this group agreement. And yeah, and we also basically made it participatory by really giving participants specific tasks also that they had to do throughout the training, or that they were invited to do throughout the training, like doing energizing games, facilitating sessions, heart keeping, so like taking care of each other. Yeah, stuff like this. Thank you.
And thank you too, Thomas. So yeah, I've heard a mix of elements. Some of them coming from the sensibility of a trainer, of knowing that designing activities has, of course, a role and an importance, and many times it makes a difference. But also the attention to other details which are a bit more invisible. Question, Thomas, while you're still here, if you can describe your target group a bit better again, so maybe you can share a bit on that as well.
I work a lot with young people with fewer opportunities, especially with queer people. But this specific project, the Flow project, was for youth workers. So it was for people who wanted to, well, they were new to, or they wanted to become trainers in non-formal education and youth work. And well, the age was from 18 upwards, so people, adults.
Yeah, thank you. And what I was mentioning is that you were sharing about your contribution, but also about some like invisible aspect that you decided to tackle anyway. For instance, you opened your explanation sharing that you decided to give support to internet access of participants in case they couldn't make it, to have a reliable connection and so on. And this brings us straight to what Yasmin was mentioning in the beginning. So accessibility and this invisible part of the problem, let's say, which is there and we should be a bit more aware of. So, Yasmin, I would like now to focus a bit with you exactly on this topic of accessibility, maybe specifically tackling the fact of web accessibility, and a bit more digging into this concept of anti-ableism that you already introduced as an inclusive approach. So can you share with us what we should be avoiding, or on the other way around, what we should be paying attention more to when setting up, using digital spaces to ensure at least a bit more of inclusion and participation to our target groups, please?
Ableism is same kind of a structural problem and form of discrimination. Like it's in the list of like racism and ableism and other like misogyny. It's institutional or interpersonal discrimination towards people with disabilities or who do not fit the norm of like abled person related to outer appearance or executive function, or like their ability to access spaces or events. So anti-ableism aims to change that. It aims to change the norm of what is viewed as abled, to be able to do something, and what we should do about it. as event organizers and youth workers and other people. First of all, I was very happy to hear the word accessibility being mentioned during the speeches, because accessibility needs to be intentional, and especially after like like the beginning of pandemic, accessibility has been taken into discussion as an intentional part. That creates awareness of accessibility. It creates awareness of like what kind of needs different groups of people have, and includes also disabled people. Then comes the acceptance that we need to start creating accessibility information about events. We need to start planning events, taking into account that everyone can participate in a more accessible way. And then becomes the actions, like the event itself, getting feedback and improving organized events, and how we structure our communications, how we inform about things, how we inform about physical or digital accessibility of websites, apps, video games. They sometimes also have accessibility functions. Subtitles are like a very common example of accessibility. So what I do at work is that we, with my colleague, we are actually creating a guide also in English, which will be published next year, about digital creative spaces and safer spaces. So we take into account in our safer space guidelines also the framework of accessibility, and emphasize the need to understand the needs of disabled people. Besides, who wouldn't like to have very clear information emails every single time that you can access in multiple ways? Why accessibility needs to be intentional, especially when we have started to have more of hybrid events and more of like activities in digital spaces, is because we live normatively, we still live in a very inaccessible and able normed world. So a person who doesn't know about your event, for example, or doesn't know about your community, or what kind of activities are arranged in what kind of apps, what kind of participation is expected from the person. They view it, we view it as a no, that it's not an accessible space for me. I have to ask whether it has an elevator, whether it has bright lighting, whether the videos have subtitles, whether the person is able to use augmentative and alternative communication devices. Will there be time acceptance for that? And all of this information that is related to informing whether the event is accessible also makes the space safer. So, and safer spaces are more inclusive. And one thing that is important is also in anti-ableism is the language we use, so that we take, like, we don't use discriminatory or othering words of people. This is a very like familiar concept in anti-racism, where we talk about slurs and avoiding slurs. So like there's also a lot of slurs that are kind of like part of still normal everyday speech related to disabilities, but it's also the institutional language that organizations use. So one practical tip, for example, is to talk about accommodations or things that you want us to know about, or talk about just needs and not special needs. Because if someone needs an access to an accessible toilet, it's not a special need, the need to go to toilets. Is there a possibility to create like absolutely inclusive spaces? with, for example, accessibility, that is for the participant to decide. So if you inform about event, you can state that it's more accessible in the same way as safer spaces guidelines state that the space is safer, not absolutely safe. It is a project. It is like an ongoing group decision to improve and to open up the digital space or the venue or participation, so that the everyone actually means everyone or as many as possible, and please give us feedback. I had some links that I wanted to share to you because one of the things that everyone can start doing as a baseline activity is to remember how to create social media posts that are accessible to, for example, screen readers, or what to take into account when choosing an application or a game or a device for different groups of people with disabilities. So I sent beforehand a set of posters which can be found in several different languages, and they are made by a group of disabled experts, and they are in English and in other languages. And then there's also like quick guides on how to create like accessible PowerPoints and Word documents, and what to take into account when live presenting and so on. Because accessibility, same with ableism, it's not like as a known word. So I've noticed that not many people have all of the keywords so that they could find information on how to improve their event communication, or like how to ask for feedback and what feedback to expect.
Now, noticing you're using GitHub, which is normally used for code and software development, as a platform to share materials for education, and I want really to underline this because it's a creative use of a tool which was probably meant for something else. But once again, we as youth workers, we prove that our creativity and way to bend the tools to our needs is always remarkable. Just to be more clear, what would be important to make a PowerPoint presentation more inclusive, for instance? So we can give some practical example. What kind of difference will it make to have an accessible PowerPoint presentation at the eyes of people which have some, I don't know, impairments or something like that?
Yeah, so for needs of different people with disability, like groups of different disabilities, there's this the GitHub one. So you can check there like different general needs for accommodations in web materials. But on the Harvard site, you can find actually like step-to-step guides for like how to create a more inclusive PowerPoint. I can list a few. Font text the font itself should be clear, so that you don't mix up big I and big L, for example. So no mirroring letters, as we call them. Then the contrast needs to be good. So like you have contrast vision checkers online that you can check the two, like if the two colors have too small contrast. Then also to avoid visual clutter in the background. And when you share the PowerPoint online later on, to make sure that a screen reader can read it, so that you haven't kind of like burned anything in the background, that you haven't added a picture as a slide with text in the picture, because a screen reader can't access text in a picture file. So these are a few things. And make sure the font is big enough.
Thank you very much. And yeah, these are very practical but very important ways to make our texts and websites and presentation more interesting. It's now time for another and final round of questions to all our guests together. what could be the key elements that in the youth work field we should pay attention to in order to grant the, let's say, the best possible experience of inclusion and participation in digital space. Let's start from Thomas now, please.
For me, I think a lot of us mentioned how the pandemic really gave us a push to actually go online and to do stuff. And for me, I've been working with digital youth work also before, and like, I don't know, I was myself a young person with few opportunities in a rural area. As a queer person, I always escaped to the internet. So I think there's this importance of digital spaces for young people, and we just need to create more of them. And I think we need better frameworks for creating them. At the moment, I see from all sides, from youth workers, from institutions, kind of a hesitancy with digital youth work, and giving also funding for digital projects has not been easy since the COVID measures have been lifted. It has not been so accessible anymore. And yeah, I'm a bit afraid that we will lose this momentum that we have at the moment, and that we could use to create more innovative youth work and more interesting new methods. So I think I encourage the people who listen here to give more resources to this, and also to just try out stuff and to do more digital projects. And for me, the other things I mentioned, I think, like, for me, it's just important that this commitment that Yasmin also mentioned now for safer spaces, and this commitment to actually want to create a safer space. I think people are often lost in, oh, how do I start becoming inclusive? It's not so easy. There's not only a few steps, there's a million steps, and any step that you take is a good step in the right direction. And there's a lot of content out there for you to look up and to learn about discrimination, and also to just listen to the experiences of.
Thank you. So commitment towards safer and so inclusive spaces from one side, and also maybe a bit more fuel in the engine to create more project and more experimentation in this direction. Even if I want to recall here that this topic of digital activities is now one of the priorities of the Erasmus Plus project, for instance. So it should really be there. Let's add something more to the list. Let's maybe hear from Panu. What would you recommend as key elements that the youth field should pay attention to in order to grant the best possible experience of digital inclusion and participation? Panu.
Well, as mentioned, there cannot be like the safe place. It can be only safer. But in participation, there's the same thing. We cannot get every youngster involved in one digital platform or in one digital space. There are different skill sets with youngsters, that how they can use the platforms, or are they accessible? And that's why the youth work should continuously search for new, better ways to participate, and use the tools that youngsters already have in common daily use, because these tool sets are familiar and for them safer to use and easier to access. And for me, my next step will be trying out virtual reality as social rehabilitation and contacting youngsters who have social phobias to see if they can interact with avatars more easily than contacting actual person, like in video chat or in real life. So these new tools has to be tested and tried out and figure out where they can use the best. And the digital youth work isn't ever ready, and we will not found any common platform for everyone. And we need diversity in youth works, in youth workers to have different kind of tool sets to use and promote in youth work.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, diversity, one of the elements, and the other one is to, I would say, go where young people are. So using the tools and the platform they already are, skilled at. But on the other side, let's be aware and check always how this platform work and potential harms or whatever. Meanwhile, we have a question which is directly connected, I would say, with this aspect. So if you know about any possible toolkit for assessing the level of human right protection of participants in terms of safety and security and inclusion in digital youth work activities or anyway in activities inside digital spaces. I have to say, not in my awareness, but I'm maybe, some of you knows and have more up-to-date information and can share something on this perspective, or anyway other key elements that we want to add to our list. And so I would now pass the floor to Yasmin.
This particular question, I also don't have like any information about a publication published in English, for example, in youth work, but I'm sure there are many projects which develop like local guides. For example, here in Finland, there's been like 3 local guides that have been published in the recent year about safer spaces guidelines and inclusivity practices in Finland. But I don't know about any like EU-wide ones. But so we were supposed to summarize our points and tie them to the general discussion in this one. Yes, so accessibility can be viewed as a framework and toolkit, and it is a quintessential part of inclusivity and creating safer and more inclusive spaces by creating them to be more accessible. And it's a community effort. It's a process, and the process is at start. So like any small change changes the norm and our basic practices of how we view like our digital spaces and plan activities, also taking into account accessibility from the beginning and not as an addition, because it's really nice to, for example, join a chat event during the chat instead of just viewing the live recording later, for example. So yeah, accessibility addresses the invisible, and anti-ableism aims to make more people visible, being able to participate, interact, perceive, contribute, and so forth. Accessibility is intentional, as inclusivity practices should be intentional as well.
I now would pass the floor to Adina to maybe add something else and something more from her side. Please, Adina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, the other experts anyway said like the core of the message that was supposed to be here. I would just add trust and somehow investing in this trust, because yeah, youth workers do a great thing. Youth researchers are struggling also to do their research project. Policymakers are somewhere over there trying also to do some things, but yeah, we should trust each other more. We should also trust the young people because they know exactly what they want and how they want, and probably it's only our role to guide a bit what's happening there and to make sure that we listen to them and we try to respond to what they do. In terms of research, well, it's my message also for my colleagues, researchers, to communicate more and better what we do, because yeah, if we do research projects and no one would have a clue about them, or we communicated them in a way that is not, as we spoke of accessibility, is not accessible to the public, then they would just be there in a file and they would not be really user friendly. So, but I would really insist on trust and the needed dialogue to support young people, because as I was saying at the beginning, no matter which of the angles and whatever complicated geometries we have in the youth sector, in the end, why do we do all this work? It's somehow to support young people to reach their full potential in terms of personal and professional development somehow. So, and it's somehow the image that they have about their future, and it's our role to support them. So trust each other and also communicate more and better, no matter where you're working in and what you're working for.
Okay, then thank you very much. And thank you all our speakers. It's time now to go to DASE and to see the graphic recording of our discussion today. We started with a round of definitions and sharing ideas and perspective about what we mean, what we talk about when we talk about inclusion and participation in digital spaces. Then we went through a few experiences which helped us to underline and to focus on some specific aspects of what could be done to achieve safer, at least safer spaces, and so more inclusive spaces also in the digital domain. Through video games, through attentions, through an approach which embraces anti-ableism, and through the insight that the research is giving us, and it's underlining as possible paths to follow. And then in this last final round, we identified a few key elements that we should all and always keep in mind when addressing the topic of inclusion and participation in digital spaces, be it trust towards young people and towards the process, be it inclusion and accessibility by design in what we organize and in what we set up in terms of spaces and platforms and so on, and going where young people are and starting from their skills and their attitudes and behaviors, but also on the other side, trying to assess and validate these platforms to be sure they are not harmful and they are trustable and reliable, let's say. And yeah, that's a very, very wide and very complicated topic, but I guess we managed to offer some interesting insight and experiences and elements and food for thought to our viewers everywhere. So once again, thank you all of our guests. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Panu. Thank you, Adina. Bye-bye.